Today, IT infrastructure faces many threats, including natural disasters, power outages, or simple human error. While some of these are out of your control, companies do have the ability to make sure your business operations avoid disruption now and in the future. Here today at the Data Protection Your Way virtual event, respected IT editor Simon Sharwood, who happily steers away from gadgets and instead covers data storage, security and technology management, will share his observations about data growth and the challenges that it presents to mid-sized businesses. IBM's technical specialists, Richard Fanous, who has over 21 years information technology industry experience spanning across Asia Pacific, and Andrew Fry, who has been a member of IBM's Global Technology Services team for over 12 years, will present a number of data protection offerings that have been designed and priced for mid-sized businesses. These solutions will provide your organisation with enhanced data protection capabilities that are able to restore your access to emails, files and databases within seconds instead of hours or days. The difference between these two solutions centres on how you choose to manage and finance your data protection strategy. Richard will first talk about the DIY solution, which is tailored to those mid-sized businesses who want to manage their data protection in-house. Andrew will then talk about IBM's data protection cloud-based pay-as-you-use managed service solution, which is suited to businesses that don't have the resources or budget for a capital investment. We'll save some time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to ask your questions throughout the presentations using the Ask a Question button, and our speakers will address them at the end of the session. After the Q&A, we will direct you into the Information Centre, where you can chat one-on-one with our IBM experts about any data issues you're experiencing. This centre will also contain solution video demos and white papers for your reference. I'll now hand over to Simon to set the scene around data growth and why you need a comprehensive data protection strategy in place within your business.
Hi, I'm Simon Sharwood, editor of searchstorage.com.au and a non-executive board member of the Storage Networking Industry Association's Australia and New Zealand chapter. You probably know us as SNEA ANZ. I understand that most of you on the webinar today work in IT, so you know that the amount of data your organisation creates each year keeps growing and growing. And because you work in IT, you also know that it gets harder and harder to squeeze more and more data through your backup window. You probably also know that backup windows aren't getting any bigger these days, what with businesses wanting applications to run 24/7 so they can power self-service applications. Today, I'm going to try to explain how we got here and what we can do to make sure that your storage, backup and recovery efforts create the outcome you want, namely protection of your data. So, to understand how we got here, I need to show you my laptop computer. It cost $300, $298 to be precise, and that's new, fresh out of the box, $298. Now, forgive me if I cry poor here for a moment, but journalists don't get paid an awful lot. A lot of the time we get paid 50 cents a word. Now, if I'm doing something easy, like writing a speech for a webinar video, it only takes me perhaps an hour to write 600 words, so I've made $300 in that hour. Well, only joking, it took me a bit longer to write this. Seriously though, if I get lucky and I do find a job when I can write 600 words an hour, it means that an hour after I turn on a new laptop, it could well be storing data of equal value to the whole computer itself. And if I write all day, the data on a hard drive could be worth 6 or 8 times as much as the whole computer. Now, that's a really, really cheap computer, but it illustrates neatly what's valuable these days, and it isn't hardware, it is information. Here's another gadget. Inside this lovely leather case is my iPad. It's pretty important too, because I use it to access the internet in all sorts of odd places. And whenever I do, I'm making data. And that data probably ends up with you. because I'm doing things that generate entries in your log files or adding data to your databases when I complete a form online. So every time I hit your website, each time I send you an email, I make data that you need to store. Now here comes the scary part. There are millions of people like me. Well, not exactly like me, but doing the same things that I do online. And on top of that, inside your organisation, people are making data all the time. And out here in the rest of the world, customers are making data too, and you have to take care of it all. An IDC study says that before long, our collective data making efforts are going to produce a zettabyte of the stuff every year. And you lucky people, you get to manage it. Now, managing it is very important because when data gets lost, value is destroyed. Here's an example. Back in the mid-1990s, I used to do PR for an now long-dead backup company called Cheyenne. And one of the case studies that we loved to use discussed a pest control company. I was never sure if this company was real or not, but there's a good story in it because this was a very clever pest control company. Every time it did a job, its people made a kind of fries with that offer and asked their customers if they'd like to book in for another pest treatment in the future. This was a real good business model because when this company had a forward booking, it could be almost certain it could count on that future booking as future revenue. But the company had no off-site backups and its offices burned down and it lost all of its data, including its forward bookings list. It went from knowing that it had lots of appointments in the future to show up and perform a service for its clients, and from there it went to a situation where it didn't even know who its clients were. The story says that in desperation the company took out ads in local papers that basically said, "Did we have an appointment with you and could you please remind us? We'd really like to exterminate your bugs." I wish there was a happy ending to this story, but there isn't. The company went broke, and it went broke pretty impressively. That's the way the story goes. Now, as it happens, even if that story is fiction, there's almost certainly some truth to it, because the National Archives and Records Administration in the USA estimates that 60% of companies that lose their data will shut down within 6 months. Now, the story about the pest control company described a small company, probably with a single server and a set of pretty simple data. Today, your organisation probably has a lot more servers and a lot more data. And I'm willing to bet there's a heap of future revenue tied up in that data. I'm also willing to bet that you've heard scary stories like this one before, so you know how important data management is. And you're probably also aware that it's not easy to manage that data. But I suspect you don't know just how hard it is to do so. To understand that, a few weeks ago I spoke to the chief scientist of a major storage systems vendor, and he just came right out and said that so far as he is concerned, you cannot expect people to manage the volume of data that businesses are being asked to manage today. He believes that the only way to manage data is through automation. He also believes that automation isn't a silver bullet, it will just hold back the tide rather than solving the overall data management problem. Now, he's not alone in predicting some interesting times are coming our way. The IDC report I alluded to before, the Digital Universe study for 2010, states that between 2009 and 2020, the information in what they call the digital universe will grow by a factor of 44. The number of files that need management will grow by a factor of 67. And storage capacity overall will grow by a factor of 30. And here's the scary bit. The staffing and investment to manage the digital universe will only grow by a factor of 1.4. Let's play those numbers again. There'll be 44 times more data in the world and 30 times more storage capacity, but you are only going to get 1.4 times the people resource to manage all that extra data. Now, I dare say that if this prediction comes true, The measurements you use today of how many storage administrators you use per gigabyte are going to start to look even cruder and less adequate than they do today. And that's if you can find a good storage administrator. It's a sad fact, but storage administration has not really made it onto the radar of universities, and nobody finishes high school, rips open their HSC results and declares in glee that now they've got the marks to get into storage. No, kids all want to be games programmers. And last week, just as an anecdote, I was talking to the leader of a virtualization user group. He reckons his members, who are all hands-on IT pros, just don't know all that much about storage. They're running up virtual machines galore and more or less hoping they can get the storage that they need. Now, even if you can find a good storage administrator, prepare to pay them and pay them well. I know this because one of the things journos do for research these days is to set up a fake job profile on Seek and other jobs boards. The emails you get from the jobs boards tell you a fair bit about who's staffing up to start a new project and the general demand for skills. I've had a profile for storage administrators going for about 3 years now, and I can tell you that these people start at around $120,000 a year, when you can find them. That's the same kind of wage that I see being paid to gun security specialists. So, here we are in a world where data is amazingly precious. Growing volumes of data mean you need more people to take care of it. But because you have 24/7 web apps, you probably have less time to spend taking care of data. Isn't that a nice little set of challenges? Now, luckily, vendors are thinking cleverly about this stuff. And one of the ideas they've come up with is called Continuous Data Protection, or CDP. CDP pretty much does what it says on the can. It protects your data continuously all the time. And that may not sound like a big change, but it's actually pretty important. Because for an awful lot of organisations, backup has traditionally been something of an event. At some point in the working day or the working week, you pretty much call a halt to various activities and let the backup systems have all the resources they need to get a backup done. The problem with this approach, as I've mentioned, is that backup windows get harder and harder to find when you're running 24/7. CDP pretty much does away with the need for a backup window by doing backups all the time. If you make a file, it gets backed up. If you change the content of a database, it gets backed up. Now, the first objection people usually raise to CDP is that it sounds like it could put rather a lot of load on your network. And the response I usually hear to that is a question about how many of you are really maxing out your 10 gigabit Ethernet connections. Sure, things can get a bit rough if you suddenly have to save a couple of gigs of video, but most of the time, a steady stream of small changes won't tax your network, and your storage area network will cope with it. And even tape write speeds are pretty impressive these days. They can cope with CDP. There's also a bit of a schism around CDP because some bright spark muddied the waters by inventing something called near CDP, which is CDP that isn't completely continuous and waits a few minutes between backups. Think of it as batch processing for CDP. But I think you can set aside those objections because just about any form of CDP can be better than conventional backups. And that's because CDP makes for insanely short recovery point objectives, or RPOs. RPOs are important because they define how much data you are willing to lose. An RPO of 4 hours means you are willing to lose 4 hours of data because you only back up every 4 hours. CDP lets you reduce RPOs to a very short amount of time, which, as we've seen, is pretty useful when you've got users on the web sending you information every heartbeat or so. So overall, the nice thing about CDP is that it automates backup and does backup very often. A second clever thing in the storage world is cloud storage. By now you've probably heard the cloud spiel about a zillion times, so you know the analogy that no business would ever run its own electricity generation plant. You buy electricity from a utility company, so why can't computing be the same? Well, that analogy applies to storage and backup too. As I've said, it's hard to find storage people, It also costs a lot of money to power your storage systems. You have to pay maintenance to the vendor, the whole yada, yada, yada. So why not just pay by the gigabyte from a cloud storage provider instead of making all that investment? I personally use cloud storage. I use it as off-site backup and to serve up some multimedia content. But my personal needs are very modest. I create unstructured data and can happily back up every 6 hours or so without impacting the other 2 people who use my home network. Your needs are probably more complex, so a commodity cloud like the one I use probably isn't for you. You probably want a cloud with some service level agreements wrapped around it so that you feel comfortable that your data is available and well protected. Now, as it happens, IBM has just that kind of cloud. IBM's outsourced storage services operate in a very cloud-like way, so you can get the super short RPO that comes with CDP and all the happiness of the cloud in one service. And for mid-sized businesses who'd still like to do data backup and recovery in a traditional way, IBM has a simple, effective bundled solution that also does in-house CDP. So there you have it, an overview of the current storage landscape. I'll be back during the Q&A in case any of that needs any clarification. But for now, let's hear from IBM's experts to further describe their solutions.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making the time to join us today. This is a short presentation on comprehensive data protection. My name is Richard Fanous, and I work within the Tivoli Software Group, managing business partners across the southern region. So when you look at your business continuity challenges, there are 2 main things. There's the recovery point objective and there's the recovery time objective. If you needed to recover your data, have you ever asked yourself how long would that take and what does that mean to you? So part of the business continuity challenges we're faced with is the gap is widening. The amount of data that needs to be backed up and the amount of time available is sort of fixed by this almost arbitrary, but it's also body clock associated. One day we need to eat, work and sleep. And when I worked as an SE with another company out at Holden's Engine Company account, I was there for 6 years. I remember in the early to mid-90s, I was asked that I had to test that the backup was working. The only way to test it was to actually do a live restore. Well, it took me 3 days of planning and it took me 1 day to do the restore. And we're not talking about an 8-hour day doing a restore. It took me the full 24 hours of that day to do the restore. And thankfully, the restore worked. So, I looked like a good guy. But at that point, I realized how important it is to have a backup solution that works, but the challenges and the issues faced with actually doing a restore. So I think the important question that we need to consider is, have you, or maybe you might need to ask your more technical people, have you ever proven that your backup works by doing a test restore? So Meta Group are telling us they're giving us some data on what it costs. What's the cost of downtime? I mean, let's just highlight one section there, the manufacturing section, if I refer back to that Holden Engine Company account that I worked at for 6 years. The cost there is $1.4 million. Now I know that in 1 hour back in the mid-1990s, the cost of their production line being down was $500,000, and that's quite a substantial amount. If you look at it in terms of seconds, the amount is in the tens of thousands of dollars per 30 seconds, and that's in that last column of the slide. So given the business challenges around restoring your data from a backup, IBM's put a lot of thought into this and has come up with a very simple and eloquent solution. It's the Comprehensive Data Protection Solution. The software component of this solution comes from Tivoli. It's the Tsm Fastback Solution, and it has 3 main components. There's the Fastback-based product, and how this product works very different from other backup products. Rather than to tape, it's actually backing up to disk. It's an incremental forever backup. It only backs up the changed blocks. So the key point there is that the backup time is going to be very, very short. It also comes with a bare machine recovery component. That allows you to rebuild a system, a server, from scratch if required, and that can be done in the space of minutes. And then there's a really good component that's been very popular. A lot of customers have bought this just based on this one component, and that's the Microsoft Exchange component. The ability to back up Microsoft Exchange databases and the ability to restore files, individual email items from within a Microsoft database. The Tivoli Fastback Center has all of those products combined. So in summary, this comprehensive data protection solution gives you the ability to back up Windows environments, things like Exchange, SQL, SAP, whole range of other applications. So I always find it's a lot easier to understand what a solution looks like, how you would implement it, and what are some of the issues that I would have in making this solution work by looking at an architectural diagram, very high level. If you look at this example, you've got the IBM X series hardware with the Fastback software sitting on top of that hardware, and the bundle offering that we're talking about, the comprehensive data protection solution. And we're backing up some servers. Now, one of the key things that Fastback has that I didn't mention before, and this is for me, this is the real clincher, this is the gotcha, is it has built-in DR, disaster recovery. All you need to do is tick one box and you can enable DR. And how you would do that architecturally is you would have a second Fastback server, and the second server backs up the first server, and that can be over a wide area link. Now, when we spoke about the incremental forever and only backing up the changed blocks in the data, that's a small amount of data, so it can be a very efficient backup that occurs over the wide area network. So it's really quite simple. We don't have too many points to consider when we look at the benefits of the CDPS bundle. It's an incremental forever, only the change blocks, so a very short backup window is required. You can create the backup based on user policies, so you can automate the way that the backup runs. Because the backup is one that doesn't require a lot of work in terms of putting tapes into drives, it's a disk-to-disk backup, the users at the branch office or at even the central office, the users can actually perform a restore if required. You can actually give the user permission to do a restore. They can populate two windows, you mount the backed up file system, and you can literally drag and drop between windows to restore individual files or an entire file system. It's very fast and efficient, and obviously there's a lot of cost savings with this kind of solution. The CDPS solution from IBM delivers real value, and the real value is that the backup time required has been greatly reduced. This chart shows figures from the US federal government agency. It's a very large environment. They've got over 2,000 servers. If we just have a look at the email backup, the window required was almost 2 days to do the backup. A restore using the old technology took about the same time, nearly 2 days. With Fastback, this solution, they were able to bring the restore into less than 10 minutes. What I'd like to highlight to you now is that IBM's made it very simple with this CDPS solution bundle. We have three sizes, a small, medium and large. The small is 1 terabyte of data, the medium is 2 terabytes of data, and the large is 5 terabytes of data. What this bundle is, it's a single part number, and it includes all of the hardware that you need in the X series server, so the memory, the processor, the disk, etc., the chassis, as well as the Tsm Tivoli Storage Manager Fastback software. All in one, easy to go, easy to configure. We'd like to share with you today two references, Australian references. One is the Asian Pacific Hospital. They've been able to reduce the backup time by 50%. They've proven their restores. They can do that in less than 10 minutes. And they've also reduced the cost of their backup. Second is Edith Cowan University out in Perth. They have over 20,000 students. Their biggest issue is that they see that their amount of data that they're needing to back up is actually doubling each year. And what they've been able to do is create a policy-based backup where they're automating the system, and that's been able to get them to free up the technical resources required to run backups, as well as reduce the overall cost. In summary, I'd like you to take away three things from this presentation. One is that we have a backup window now that can be greatly reduced because we're only backing up the change blocks. Second point is you can actually test a restore. Remember that example I gave you in the beginning? It took me so long to test the restore, and I'd challenge you to ask your technical people, have you tested a restore, and see what the effort is required there. And thirdly, do you recall that architectural diagram that I showed when I talked about the built-in DR feature? Just check one box, 2 Fastback servers running on the X series bundles, and you've got built-in DR over a wide area link. So I think those three things put together make this a very compelling solution. I'd like to thank you for your time. I'll be around during the question and answer session, and thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Andrew Fry. I'm the Business Unit Executive for Business Continuity and Resiliency Services at IBM. Now, we're going to talk about data protection from a services point of view. And as Simon has alluded to, there's a number of challenges which are affecting mid-market clients right now, particularly data growth and backup windows within which to protect your data. Now, organizations are also struggling with visibility and access to distributed data. Up to 85% of critical data now resides outside computer rooms. And of the data footprint, 92% of Australia and New Zealand CIOs in a recent survey actually said that they had major issues with backup reliability. And in our own experience, we find that when we bring clients onto our services, we see that up to 40% of data isn't actually being protected. If you think about what that means, it's like saying from January to May, I won't back up my data, and from there on I will. That's a pretty big exposure in anyone's books, and we're seeing that kind of stability risk from data protection using today's methods. So what we're going to talk about today is the services side, and we're going to talk about managed backup in the cloud. Now, managed backup in the cloud simply is about backing up data from anywhere to anywhere and being able to restore that data back to where you need it to be. So before I get into the detail, let's keep that principle of we don't really mind where the data is, where it's got to go to. It's about making sure that it gets there and back reliably. So let's first look at an example of an enterprise that, and you might have your own computer room, for example, with your core critical applications, maybe your databases. You may have your branch offices. You may have a few locations around Australia or New Zealand, and you have maybe your field force. Could be the sales reps, could be delivery staff, all of which control and manage some part of your critical data footprint. Now, in this example, the picture you're looking at now, how we'd operate that data footprint from a services point of view is that we can manage the backup and restore of data from your computer room to an IBM data center, for example, or to your own or a partner's data center. We can pull in data from remote sites into any location you prefer, and we can also pull in data from laptops and desktops to any location you prefer and back again. So it truly is about enterprise data protection, whether that's from as small a volume as a laptop data volume or as large as a large computer room or a large data center volumes in the tens or hundreds of terabytes, all using a single service management platform. Now, the benefit of cloud service model is, number one, is an end-to-end services model where you pay on a per gig protected basis. All hardware, software and labor is included, and you have scalability handled. One of the major issues with managing data in such an exponential growth environment is handling the next step increase. So many clients we talk to, they're always struggling at the point where they've got to make the next investment, whether that's disk or tape libraries and so on, which is often far in excess of what their current capacity is because they need to plan for the future. One of the core benefits of a cloud-based service is you can scale as you need to, pay as you need to. So the responsibility of providing the infrastructure and the step change of assets goes onto IBM, and you just pay for what you use. So what we're going to do now is just drill down into the computer room element of the enterprise, and then we'll talk about remote data. On the computer room side, this is about handling large volumes of data, live database snapshots, and we do provide the hardware and the software, whether it's disk, tape, or virtual tape, and on all as a per gig per month basis. Now, one of the features here is we provide it on a streamed basis, which is data moved, is how it's built. Per gig moved from the production device to the backup devices. And the reason we do that is we find that over 10 years experience of doing this for our clients already today, the most cost-effective way on high data volume environments is to price based on data moved versus data stored, which tends to be a very large volume, or data protected, which is also a large volume. And that's where we can provide a most cost-effective price point to mid-market clients. And for a remote data protection point of view now, in terms of data which resides outside the computer rooms or outside the data centers, we take a different approach now, and that is data protected so data is priced on a protected basis, which means IBM carries all the risk in this model. So if you know, for example, that you're backing up 40 gig of your desktop or laptop, and it's like predetermining a phone bill before you get the bill. We take maybe 30 copies of that back in at a vault but you only pay for the data you're protecting. And again, that's in distributed environments, that's where we find is the most cost-effective way of providing a cloud service with data backup. Now, in terms of how we operate this model, we tend to use internet or dedicated lines, but mostly internet-based transmission for remote sites, as it makes sense given you've got distributed areas to use existing infrastructure. Now, I often get the question when we talk about remote sites, what about performance and security over the internet? Well, the great news is that they help each other. So the performance side, after the initial backup, we find that we're only transmitting about 1 to 3% of the protected data volume on a daily basis. And that's done by two-stage deduplication. And the deduplication process itself actually enhances security because the data that's moving over the wire is already in a hashed matrix-like view of the world, which is unintelligible and can't be put back together. And the link is 128-bit encrypted as well. So the performance and the security both enhance each other to make sure it actually works quite well and seamlessly within your environment, and data is protected. And data is protected in a secure format, encrypted in storage, and can only actually be restored back into your environment. Now let's look at how the cloud service is actually provisioned. One of the great features of this cloud service is that we have a single management portal, regardless of whether we're talking about tens or hundreds of terabytes of computer room data or 10 gigabyte of laptop data. The same service enterprise class model covers everything, which means that the user, from an end user point of view, receives a web portal to actually do self-initiated restores and backups from a laptop point of view. And for the computer room and data center side, the IT administrative function gets access to a web portal as well off the same platform, which provides all data on success rates, the entire data footprint, and ultimate visibility into what's actually happening in the environment from a backup point of view. And one of the other features of the single operating model is that we capacity manage all infrastructure. So we'll know when the capacity gets to a certain point where we can deploy infrastructure on demand within 6 weeks and before capacity breaks its capacity point. So the model is managed from a central point 24/7. So there's true management of all the backup jobs back and forth and user control for restores within the one model, regardless of location. So let's talk about the delivery model. Now, IBM's been doing this for a while now, and it's been, well, it hasn't been called cloud all that time. We actually currently manage under this cloud-based model 130 petabytes globally for many of the largest organizations in the world, but also many mid-market clients as well. We have over 3,500 clients, many of those mid-market. Now, within that, one of the benefits is the reporting, as you can see on the screen today, but also we provide enterprise class data backup, which means that we provide SLA reporting and accountability onto the vendor being IBM, which is not always common when we're talking cloud in the market today. So thank you for your time today. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions relating to your business around how IBM's cloud service can assist, and please join us for the live Q&A following this session.